My name is Sarah Miller. I'm 33 years old, and I work long night shifts as a nurse in a busy emergency room. Most days, my job is exhausting, chaotic, and emotionally draining. But despite everything, I've always believed it matters. Because in a hospital, the smallest decision can mean the difference between someone going home or never leaving at all. Last spring, I went to my stepsister's wedding reception. I almost didn't go, to be honest. Lily and I had never been close, and family gatherings with her usually ended the same way, with me standing quietly in a corner while she reminded everyone how different our lives had turned out. But my mom asked me to come. She said it would mean a lot to the family, so I showed up with a small gift, wearing a simple blue dress I'd bought on sale after one of my hospital shifts. The venue was one of those fancy downtown hotels with giant chandeliers and marble floors. Everything looked perfect, like something straight out of a movie. Soft lights hung over the dance floor, and every table had these huge white flower arrangements that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Lily loved that kind of attention. She was glowing in a designer wedding dress, surrounded by people laughing at every word she said. Her new husband, Jason, stood beside her, smiling politely, introducing her to relatives and business partners like she was the star of the evening. I slipped inside quietly, hoping to stay unnoticed. That's usually my strategy at events like this. I find a seat, smile when someone talks to me, and avoid getting dragged into Lily's spotlight. We didn't grow up the same way. After my father passed away when I was 12, my mom remarried Lily's dad a few years later. On paper, we became sisters overnight, but inside that house, things always felt divided. Lily had everything growing up: private schools, new cars on her birthdays, expensive vacations with her friends. Meanwhile, I worked after school, saved money for college, and eventually went into nursing. I never really minded the difference. My job gave me something real, something that mattered. But Lily saw life through a completely different lens. For her, success meant luxury, titles, and social status. And tonight, her wedding had all of that. Waiters walked around with trays of champagne. Guests in expensive suits talked about investments and vacation homes. Laughter echoed through the ballroom while the band played soft jazz in the background. I found a seat near the end of a long table and quietly placed my gift box beside my chair. For about 20 minutes, everything was fine. People talked about the ceremony, complimented the decorations, and shared stories about the couple. I kept my head down, eating dinner and listening politely. Then, Lily suddenly stood up. She tapped her glass with a spoon, and the ringing sound cut through the music. "Hey, everyone," she said loudly with a big smile. The conversations around the room slowly faded. "I want to introduce someone from my side of the family." For a moment, I didn't realize she was talking about me. Then she looked directly across the table and pointed. "Sarah, come here." My stomach tightened immediately. Dozens of heads turned toward me. I stood up slowly and walked toward the main table while everyone watched. I could already recognize that look on Lily's face. I'd seen it 1,000 times growing up. That playful smile she wore right before making someone the punchline of a joke. She placed her hand lightly on my shoulder and turned toward Jason's family. "This," she announced, "is my stepsister." Then she laughed softly. "And before anyone asks," she added, "she's just a nurse." A couple of people at the table chuckled politely. Someone muttered, "Oh, that's nice." I felt the familiar wave of embarrassment creep into my chest, but I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I just smiled. Because honestly, I'd been through worse things than awkward jokes. Hospitals teach you that pretty quickly. For a moment, the conversation moved on. People picked up their glasses again, and someone started talking about the honeymoon plans. I thought the moment was over, but then something strange happened. Across the table, Jason's father stopped eating. He was an older man with gray hair and a serious expression. At first, I thought he was just listening to the conversation, but then I realized he was staring directly at me. Not rudely, not angrily, just studying my face like he was searching through an old memory. Jason noticed it too. "Dad, everything okay?" he asked. The man nodded slowly but didn't look away from me. "Yeah," he said quietly. Then he placed his fork down and leaned back slightly. Lily kept talking excitedly about travel plans. She said, "We're starting in Greece, then maybe Spain." But Jason's father seemed distracted. After a moment, he leaned toward his son. "What did you say her name was?" he asked. Jason glanced toward me.
Sarah. The man repeated the name slowly under his breath, like he was testing it. Sarah. Lily waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't worry about her," she joked. "She practically lives inside hospitals." A few people laughed again. But Jason's father didn't smile. Instead, he leaned forward slightly and looked directly at me. "I'm sorry," he said politely. "Have we met before?" The question caught me off guard. I shook my head gently. "I meet a lot of people through work," I said. He nodded slowly, still thinking. "Yeah, that makes sense." For a moment, it seemed like he was about to say something else, but the band suddenly started playing a louder song. People cheered and headed toward the dance floor. The moment faded, but I noticed something. For the next 20 minutes, Jason's father kept glancing in my direction, like a memory was slowly working its way back to him. Eventually, the band took a break. Guests returned to their seats. That's when he walked back to the table and looked at me again. This time, his eyes widened slightly. "Sarah," he said slowly. "Yes?" He paused for a moment. 3 years ago, were you working at County General Hospital?" My heart skipped. "Yes." The man leaned back in his chair and exhaled. "I knew it," he whispered. Jason looked confused. "Knew what?" His father looked at him with a serious expression. 3 years ago, I was in a bad car accident." The table fell silent. "I was rushed into the emergency room, barely conscious. Most of the doctors were stuck in traffic because the highways were closed that night." Guests nearby leaned closer to listen. "For hours," he said, "there was only one person in that room making sure I stayed alive." Then he slowly pointed toward me. That nurse was her. The entire table froze. Jason stared at me in shock. "You saved my dad?" I shook my head slightly. "I just did my job." But the older man shook his head firmly. "No," he said. "You stayed with me for 6 hours. You kept talking to me so I wouldn't pass out. You monitored my breathing. You kept checking my pulse." His voice softened. "If you hadn't been there, I probably wouldn't be sitting here tonight watching my son get married." No one at the table spoke. Jason stood up slowly and walked around to my side. Then he held out his hand. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "I really mean that." Some guests looked embarrassed about laughing earlier. One woman near the table even gave Lily a disapproving look. Lily herself had gone completely quiet. Her confident smile from earlier had disappeared. Jason's father turned toward her calmly. "You introduced her as just a nurse." The room was silent. "You shouldn't ever say just a nurse about someone who saves lives." Lily's face turned pale. For the first time in years, she didn't have a clever response. I suddenly felt uncomfortable being the center of attention, so I smiled politely and said the only thing that felt true. I was just doing what nurses do. But Jason's father shook his head again. "No," he said gently. "You were doing something extraordinary." The band started playing again. Music filled the room and the reception slowly returned to normal. But something had changed. People looked at me differently now, not as the quiet stepsister in the simple dress, but as someone who had mattered in a moment that truly counted. Lily stayed unusually quiet for the rest of the night. She avoided eye contact and kept busy talking to other guests. And honestly, I didn't need an apology, because sometimes the most powerful kind of respect doesn't come from arguments or revenge. It comes from truth showing up at exactly the right moment. That night, I left the reception quietly, just like I arrived. But as I walked outside, Jason's father caught up with me near the parking lot. He shook my hand again. "Thank you for giving me the chance to see my son's wedding day." I smiled. "Take care of yourself," I replied. Then I drove home. The next morning, I went right back to the hospital for another shift. Another long night, another room full of patients who needed help. Because at the end of the day, titles and fancy parties don't really define a person. What matters are the quiet moments when someone chooses to help another human being. And sometimes, the people who look the smallest in the room are the ones who quietly hold someone's life in their hands.